Jupiter for an Aries ascendant. For Aries, Jupiter rules the 9th and the 12th house. The 9th and the 12th house. Jupiter is a planet of faith, a planet of surrender, a planet of good fortune, a planet of the culture in which we come from. And it represents culture in general. Represents counselors. Now, for an Aries ascendant, we need to pay particular attention to, again, the exaltation and the debilitation points of these planets, Jupiter in particular. So when we think about the 9th lord for an Aries ascendant being debilitated in the 10th house, there's something that we can think about here. This is oftentimes why Aries ascendants sometimes have difficulty taking action in regards to education and schooling. Now again, that is an overgeneralization. There are plenty of Aries ascendants, many that I know, that have master's degrees, PhDs, and these sorts of things. But generally speaking, it can show that the 9th lord being in the 10th, debilitated in the 10th, because it's debilitating Capricorn, that the person might not necessarily be able to easily make that adjustment into taking action, the 10th house, towards their education. This is why Aries ascendants typically can be those individuals who are self-starters, who are the people that maybe start to go to college because their family tells them it's good for them, but never finishes and ends up having a business larger than anyone else in the family, or inventing something that brings them income greater than any other members of the family. So Aries ascendants, education is not always the most important thing. And sometimes it can even get in the way of their path. And personally, those of you who've had sessions with me, especially those of you who've asked me questions about your children, you know that I'm not the type of individual that always says, yes, your son or daughter should go to college. Because I don't really believe that myself. Of course, I went to college, but had I thought about it and not just followed what I was told to do, I might not have. But many good things came out of it. But there are some people out there that college ends up becoming more of a drain on their resources. They end up getting into all kinds of student loan debt. And then you ask them, well, what are you doing? They end up being maybe a waitress or a waiter, and they've got $200,000 in debt. And while there's absolutely nothing wrong with being a waitress or a waiter, you can make lots of money doing that. The $200,000 in debt is where the actual problem is. So for an Aries ascendant, always they need to think about this. Is it really worth it to explore education long term? And again, there will be other factors of the chart to consider for that. But the other thing is that the 10th house is a house that deals with again, our activity in the world, what we're known for, what we're defined by. And when we think about Jupiter as being the sharer of knowledge, the planet that deals with religion and philosophy, when you think about the 9th lord being in the 10th and it being debilitated there, would that indicate to you that for an Aries ascendant, that they need to be the kind of person that goes out talking about their ideals or preaching these sorts of things? Not really. That's not the skill set or the purpose, generally speaking, of an Aries ascendant. Sometimes it will be, other factors being related to that within the chart. But at other times, what we might find is that with an Aries ascendant, once they start getting into religion or philosophy, they become a fanatic about it. And that's because Jupiter in bad dignity, that's where we get the problems with Jupiter. Jupiter in good dignity will not become a fanatic. Jupiter in good dignity will share information clearly and well and let their light shine, but they're not going to push on anybody. They're not going to be concerned if the person down the street is of a different religion or believes different things. The exalted Jupiter, the wonderful Jupiter, is a friend to all, no matter what they believe. So this also takes us into some other ideas when people say, I don't want to have a good Jupiter because that'll turn me into a fanatic, or that'll turn me into someone who's a religious hardliner or whatever it might be. And that is wrong. That is not the way it works. There has to be something else going on with Jupiter to make that happen, because Jupiter on his own is about wisdom, knowledge, peace, light, and can see that we're all on a particular path. for ourselves, for our own individual temperament. And the good Jupiter respects that. He doesn't care what zodiac you use. He doesn't care who you pray to. He doesn't care what you think about the newest health fad. All he cares about is supporting you along your own particular path. So we have to remember this about Jupiter. So then if we think about, for an Aries ascendant, Jupiter being exalted in the 4th house, in the feeling portion of the person's body and being, that tells us that for an Aries ascendant, wow, they can be extremely philosophical, extremely religious, deeply devotional. Again, it is a very private matter for them. And they are not necessarily the ones that are supposed to go out and shout it off of rooftops or to stand up on their soapbox and proclaim it to the world. They are meant to live quietly, because remember, the 4th house is a secret house, a hidden house. It's underneath, it's not in the visible portion of the chart. They're meant to attend to their duties quietly. So this is the individual who might be the business person, who might be the soldier, who might be the PhD, who might be the athlete, who every morning wakes up at 4 a.m. and goes through their prayers, their meditation, and they'll do it for a half hour, an hour, whatever it might be. And then the rest of their day, they're just business people, they're athletes, they're educators. They're not doing it to be something, to prove anything to anyone. It's for their own particular development. So one of the great things that an Aries ascendant can learn by the fact that Jupiter is debilitated in the 10th and Jupiter is exalted in the 4th is that they are not meant to go out and change the world philosophically or religiously. Sure, they might be there to engineer new things, to invent new things, to take care of people who are invading one's country unlawfully. That's more in line with Mars and Aries. But is it to be proving something religiously, philosophically, or from an ideology? No. The Aries ascendant is meant to incubate their spirituality. And that can be a great source, a great wellspring of sustenance, joy, and peace for them as they deal with the difficult things of the world. Because remember, that's one of the things Aries is meant to do. He's meant to come into the world because he's ruled over by Mars. Mars sees problems, fixes problems, takes care of things right now. And it's much easier to do that if you are coming at it from a natural state of clarity and contentment, which is developing that Jupiter internally, quietly. Which is why devotional practices on one's own, exploring a philosophical practice on one's own, doesn't mean you don't have a mentor or a teacher helping you, but it means that you don't go to meditation groups, you don't dramatize the fact that you are a churchgoer, these sorts of things. It's all very private. That is what sustains an Aries ascendant. It helps keep the Aries ascendant on one's path, making sure that they are attending to their duties and keeping them centered in a state of peace as they say in the Bhagavad Gita, the yogi is meant to do one's duty but not to reap the fruits of that. So that helps the Aries ascendant to be able to accomplish this. When we think about this blueprint of how how Jupiter functions for Aries, a Mars-ruled sign. Now, Jupiter represents the innate faith and capacity to surrender. We talked about this earlier on. So one of the things that we see is that the Aries ascendant is learning to do, but then to surrender the fruits of their doing. This is where a lot of happiness comes for an Aries ascendant. That's also why, ideally, an Aries ascendant needs to follow a code, even if it's a personal code, but not overthink things. When we think about the fact that Jupiter rules over the 9th house, and it's exalted in Cancer, which, according to some texts, is a sign particularly of foreign travel. I believe it's Jaimini Sutras that discusses this. This is one of the reasons why an Aries ascendant, while they need to have a home base, they can often travel the world. They can often have a love for travel and change, and they can be pioneers in this regard. However, Jupiter also rules over the 12th house, which are expenses, and losses. But due to the dual ownership of 9th and 12th, one of the things that we can see is that for an Aries ascendant, oftentimes, again, assuming they're living within their means and they're not just being rash with their spending, their expenses, the long-term losses, are really just investments for greater prosperity and happiness. Okay? So Jupiter is a very important planet for an Aries ascendant, and we really need to think about how Jupiter functions for Aries so that we don't get confused, as many people sometimes do, when they think about how Jupiter functions. Jupiter is the great benefic, period. If he's not acting like a great benefic, it's because there is some other, maybe Lajatatiya Vashta, maybe dignity, true dignity. Now remember, Jupiter in good dignity acts like a good Jupiter. Jupiter in bad dignity, that's where we get the problems. But again, going back to the blueprint of Aries, keep all of this in mind, and it can help you to find greater happiness as an Aries ascendant by contemplating these ideas related to Jupiter.